In the United States, we have one of the highest divorce rates worldwide. I'm sure you've heard the statistic that 50% of US married couples will get a divorce, and that number is a bit questionable. It really depends on how you calculate the data, but that's accurate enough. So, but there is one big factor that a lot of people don't consider, and that is the age at which you first get married. Younger couples tend to have just a much higher chance of divorce than couples who get married when they're older. Like if you're married between the ages of 20 to 24, then your chance of divorce is about 60%. And this refers back to something I was talking about in the previous videos, where when you're not to your mid-20s, you're still developing. Your frontal lobe is still developing. The part of your brain that just has to do with logic and understanding consequence and just being able to manage your emotions, like those kinds of things, that's not fully developed. So it makes sense that you should wait till you're done growing before you get married. That way you know what you're getting into. But yeah, like I said, the US has one of the highest rates of divorce. France, from the data I've seen, has just slightly, taken the first place rank, but it's only a minor difference. So when we look at the different kinds of people in our country and, who gets divorced and why they get divorced, what we see is that ethnicity actually seems to be a big factor. African and Asian American couples, they tend to be married for a longer period of time before getting that divorce. Also, we see ethnically mixed marriages tend to be at a higher risk of getting a divorce. One of the more commonly reported issues that led to a divorce is infidelity. Other commonly reported issues have to do with things like incompatibility, like just drifting apart, not having a lot in common, drug or alcohol abuse, and just, growing apart, just spending less and less time with each other. But here are some data that I'd like to share with you. These are the top 10 reasons for divorce separated by gender. So one thing that you'll notice right away is the first 3 items for both men and women are exactly the same. So communication problems is number 1, number 2 is unhappiness, and number 3 is incompatibility. So those are incredibly crucial issues that could result in a divorce, unfortunately. But what I think is really interesting is the divergence in number 4. If you notice, number 4 and 6 for the men and women are swapped. So number 4 for men is sexual problems, and for women that's number 6. And number 4 for women is emotional abuse, and for men that's number 6. So that kind of does illustrate something I was talking about in a previous video, how there is a big gender difference in terms of what men and women are looking for in that relationship. But yeah, financial problems is the same across both. And then you see some other differences as you go down. But that's what I think is the most interesting thing about this, is how sexual problems and emotional abuse have different priorities for men and women. Now, a lot of people talk about divorce like it's some horrible thing, and it can be a terrible experience to go through, but people tend to look at divorce from the wrong perspective. A lot of people talk about divorce like it's the end of something great. You had this marriage and you lost it. You screwed it up, right? That's definitely not the way you want to think about divorce. The way divorce actually is, if you really think about it, is it's the end of a bad situation. Nobody gets a divorce when they're perfectly happy. Nobody gets a divorce when the marriage is working the way it should. People only get a divorce if it's failing, if they're miserable, if things aren't working out. So divorce is not, a bad thing in that sense. Divorce is actually great. It provides an escape from a bad, if not abusive, situation. But while divorce can be, a great thing for individuals in bad situations, it typically does cause problems. It generally causes financial and child support problems for women. But, because these women are generally escaping from a bad situation, if they initiate that divorce, then typically we see them improve in their emotional health and physical health. A lot of development in their optimism and self-growth. And adjusting to this newfound single life is going to be a lot easier and better for people who are less hostile towards their ex and just more forgiving and more adaptable. Remarriage is something that is commonly pursued for both men and women, but it's just less likely to occur for older women. Now, one big factor that makes this whole thing a lot more complicated is children. If you're trying to get a divorce with somebody that you share a child with, that's just going to add a whole new layer. In most cases, the mother has gotten support. The mother has gotten custody of the children. That's typically how it's gone in our country, at least. But she's not always guaranteed the financial means to support that child. So this typically will result in a more stressful household where the mother is typically too busy to provide any real support for that child. And something else that's quite common is, while the mother gets custody, the father is basically pushed out of the child's life. Typically, he will not be a part of that child's life. And in many cases, if there's reason to, he may be legally prevented from seeing that child. But these are just like the worst case scenarios. Divorce doesn't have to be such a terrible thing. It can actually be, it can be something that the two individuals involved can cooperate on. Even if they can't cooperate in a marriage, maybe they could cooperate on something like this. So this is what we call a collaborative divorce, and it can help to deal with a lot of these custody issues. So collaborative divorce is this kind of voluntary, contractually based alternative dispute resolution process for couples who want to negotiate a resolution to their situation rather than having a ruling imposed on them by some court or arbitrator. So this intervention has been specifically designed to assist parents who have young children, and the early results of this experiment have been positive. So, as I was saying, this can be a great thing for individuals who can cooperate at least on some basic levels. Both individuals can get what they want instead of, somebody being basically kicked out of the child's life. Now, parental divorce, even if you cooperate, even if everything goes perfectly, in the ideal situation, parental divorce will negatively affect the children, even when they're fully grown. It will affect the children's views on intimacy and marriage. It will affect their ability to achieve a meaningful, loving relationship and being sexually intimate and being able to commit to someone else as a parent, or when they grow older, And it will also generally negatively affect their relationship with their father. Because, like I was saying, even in a perfect situation, generally the father is kind of pushed away to a certain degree. So it will negatively affect the relationship with the father, but it typically brings children closer to their mother. And divorce, as I already mentioned, is something that is unfortunately pretty common. But marriage is also very common. So a lot of people will seek to get remarried after having a divorce. On average, men and women will wait a few years, about 3.5 years before remarrying. But getting married is something that they still value and desire. Now, European Americans, military veterans, and those with less education, we tend to see those kinds of individuals marry more often, so they're getting more divorces than other people and then remarrying. And the more times you get a divorce and remarry, the higher your probability of getting another divorce tends to become. So remarriages typically have a 25% higher rate of divorce than the original marriage. And this probability is even higher if this remarriage involves stepchildren. Now, just in general, when we look at the data, we do see that women are more likely to initiate the divorce. Most likely it's because of, this kind of abusive relationship I was describing earlier. But they're also less likely to remarry, unless one factor we saw here, unless they're from a lower socioeconomic status. So people from a lower socioeconomic status do tend to pursue marriage more often.